like, I don't think Ohad Moromi's work is Fluxus, because Fluxus refers only to this very specific point in time in this group of artists.
What year did it end?
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't know. It's hard to know. It's just kind of when the practitioners started doing other things,
Well, there's people who are still calling themselves Fluxus artists.
I think
who work now.
Right, I think that's true, and I think that I think that's a continuing, you know, you could call it neo-Fluxus, or everyone adds something on to make it new again, or continue in the tradition of, but I think that this is really a moment in history. Just like, you can't really have Dada artists anymore. You have artists that are working with Dada, but it's not the historical moment. But that's okay, because things don't need to be clearly categorized. It's easy and helpful to have the reference points, but
Were there 18 pieces here? Or what is it? 18 happenings in 6 parts. When is that?
I think that there were 6 performances over the course of the evening, kind of like a play, and 18 happenings, written instructions happened throughout the course of the 6 performances. And it was done for 2 nights, so it was done all over again the next night.
I'm just jumping fast forward right now to the De Young, which I think it's the largest exhibit ever, and it's Hackney, and it's really, all the characteristics are there, and all the possibilities are there for the viewer who's supposed to be part of the experience. And in looking at one of the videos of one of his shows, he pulls in a long line of white chairs, and the gallery owner asks, "What is this?" And he said, "Because it's the intention to make clear that you are to be there with the experience of the art." It seems so related.
I think, and was there a painting as part of this presentation, or just?
Yeah, paintings, and then I'm thinking there's a video there now showing him driving the drive, and that's with when he was planning the music of Wagner, so that for each, as you descend or ascend, the music would match the experience that the artist has, and that we're supposed to have.
Yeah, and I think that also brings up a nice point when talking about these artists. You know, they were living, breathing people, are living, breathing people who have interests that go beyond just making their artwork. They listen to music, they read the newspaper, they visit museums, and so I think everything in their life is coming into their artwork in some direct or indirect way. And so, yeah, like listening to the Wagner and the intentionality, I think that that's really nice that Hockney wanted to put down chairs and, you know, tell people, sit down, spend some time just looking at things. I think it's really important. Usually when I was teaching in grad school, first thing I would do is make my students go into the museum and look at artwork. Nobody knows how to take the time to look anymore, it seems. And I think that that's really important. And even with conceptual art, clues are offered. You know, like even here, looking at this painting on the wall, the drips down the gallery wall say this was made here. You're supposed to think about why it was made here and not in my studio alone privately. So yeah, it's really important to stop and look. And we were talking about space. And artist is known as a sculptor, a minimalist sculptor, if we want to help categorize things. And there were two things about this exhibition that he did in 1964. He did not make these objects. They were fabricated by professional industrial fabricators, and they're intrusive into the viewer's space. You have to walk into this gallery and you have to navigate what's there. They're not nicely placed on a pedestal that you can stop and admire. You become very aware of your own body in the space. And this became another really big thing, and we were talking, Frady mentioned Ed Ruscha and the idea of space and moving down the Sunset Strip. And this was basically done at the same time. Ruscha's book was 66, this is 64, 65. So that's one way. Another way, we have Fluxus that's asking the viewer to participate very explicitly. Then we have these artists working in sculpture, working in photography and books, working in all of these different mediums, but kind of exploring the same themes. How can we get the viewer to be an active participant? And then we have another, I guess, grandfather of conceptual art, Joseph Beuys, and then also talking in relationship to Jackson Pollock and the myth of the artist. Beuys really made a name for himself in the early 70s because as he was introducing himself to the art world, he created this story about who he was, how he was raised by native peoples in, I think, Tibet or something, with a pack of wolves and survived off of animal fat. And he fabricated this whole creation story for himself, this myth around him. And then he did performances. Most famously, he locked himself in a gallery with a wolf or a coyote, sorry, for I don't know how long. But he was really a sensational artist. But the whole idea was that he was playing with the idea of what it meant to be an artist. He's this guy who would create these opportunities, and I chose this one because I think it kind of relates to the idea of the kibbutz and planting 7,000 oak trees, where he got together a community of people to work for a common cause, but he was the artist with this grand myth about him. And he did create objects, but he was mostly known for these performative and community-based artworks.
We have this one. We have it.
Yeah.
And the trees
Yeah, you
and-
should all recognize it.
Okay.
But I think that was a very good question. You know, so for our trees exhibition, we had this, and it was literally this photograph on the wall, which is, you know, there's this great story behind it, but it's hard for a visitor who's coming without a docent to engage with the work in a way that feels more, that, you know, where they can really feel the artwork or connect with it in a more meaningful way. And I wonder, like, is there, you know, I think there's a difference between seeing a photograph of a conceptual work like this, where there's this long story behind it, but as a passing visitor, you really don't get to experience that.
Right.
And like, what can we do to, you know, especially where we're helping the visitors see more, you know, how can we bring that alive for them in a way that is interesting?
Well, I think it's hard because, as you can see, this artwork was not in a museum. It wasn't meant to be in a museum. museum. It was people outside planting trees, and 7,000 trees. It's still ongoing, I should say. So the Dia Art Foundation in New York actually has taken it on as a project and has planted trees around Manhattan. And it's kind of an ongoing project, and I think, yeah, how do you present it? There are videos. You can present videos. It's tough. It depends. Yeah. I think you have to know the story, and you can participate. You can plant trees, and I think it just depends on the context.
Do you think the artist had any intent of us viewing his story in a museum?
Yeah, I think he was a very professional artist, if you can say that. He was well aware of the market and the presentation of artwork. He had many museum and gallery shows in his lifetime. He is an artist who really embraced the idea of the multiple. He would create, in fact, the LA County Museum a few years ago had an exhibition of just Joseph Beuys' multiples. So he often, he did work that would go in a museum and work that didn't, but also this is an official photograph. So, he knew to pose for the cameras and to document
Which one is he?
He's
Oh,
the
with
one
the
with
shirt.
the hat.
Oh, okay. Uh-huh.
I'm just wondering what kind of response he expected of a photograph like this hanging in a museum, in terms of engagement or, understanding his plan, his instruction, his idea, unless
Right.
you have it explained. Is that are we part of the artwork by explaining?
That's a good question. I don't know, but I don't think he cared is really the honest answer. I think he made plenty of things that he wanted to put in the museum, and this artwork for him was not about the museum, but it was about still becoming part of the canon of art history. He knew that he wanted people talking about this artwork. I don't think he cared about the museum presentation as much as maybe the presentation in an art history textbook or something.
But actually, to bring it back to what we're dealing with now, it's sort of the same thing, although we know that Lazarus, his work, we're supposed to be viewing it where we're viewing it.
Right.
Yet, what can they get from it without our help?
This particular project was also came in the fact that he was a huge environmentalist.
He was, yes.
I remember it had these granite slabs next to it, so. In the context of the exhibit, at least on these photographs, it was sort of like static and growth.
And that was another artist piece next to the trees that he planted. I can't remember what artist riffed on it, but that was another artist riffing on Beuys' planting of the trees. So it was something that's very static and immobile, in contrast to the oaks. And it was a project that was in New York, and I can't remember. Does anyone remember the name of that artist? I feel like Steve should remember. Oh, Steve.
It was one a lot of us didn't focus on.
Yeah.
Well, I just wanted, next, but Beuys talked about these trees as granite. It's natural that they would grow and live and last as we see granite sculptures from long ago. That the idea was that the trees would not be temporary, but that they would grow strong like granite, and that's the language that he used.
I'd like us to jump perhaps to Lazarus since time is running out.
Okay.
And how you would relate what we've learned about conceptual art to the exhibit that's here.
Is everyone else happy to do that? Okay. Okay. So I'm actually not working on the Lazarus show, but I will talk about his work as much as I know how as an art historian, and I think the way that we have had these conversations. So maybe we can start with you all telling me about Lazarus after this conversation and after your introduction, and maybe I can help kind of steer some ideas. And as you can see, we bypassed some slides that maybe we can refer back to. So this piece we know is a presentation of Occupy signs. He's a Chicago-based artist. And what he did was he found media photographs of Occupy protests around the country and asked people to look through his archive of photographs and pull out a sign that spoke to them and then recreate the sign for him to hang in the gallery. So, yeah.
Well, it seems like he's definitely riffing on this idea of originality and the original and authorship, and that he didn't necessarily author the photos, nor the original signs, nor the subsequent signs we see in the museum, but that he still gets to put his name on the label as the artist. And so that seems like a definite pickup from these conceptual artists that you were talking about.
Also a copy of a copy.
Yeah.
Right. So not only ideas of authorship, but of originality.
There's also the instructions that he presented in his workshop and the experience in the workshop. I don't know what it is. I've been questioning what people were anticipating when they walked in to do this project.
Right, I don't
What
know.
did they walk out with?
That's a good question, maybe to ask the artist. What did he tell people when they were coming to work with him? What were they expecting? Were they expecting to participate in an artwork? Were they asked to just come and be sign painters?
You also asked them to engage in the concept of this political discussion.
Mm-hmm. Right. And do you think that the politics of the participants matters for this work, or do you think that this is a statement about politics and the Occupy movement by the artist?
It could be both. Because it would matter which one they chose to copy. And didn't he also have people take a sign and walk around in one of the exhibitions?
Right.
He did.
But it's also documentation. A lot of these things documenting these moments. This is a document of a time and a place, even if it isn't that time and place. It documented a moment in history of this movement, and then people had some role in it. So, and it does make you, when you write something, class war ahead, you know, that's not like writing, you know, do not step on the sidewalk or something. You know what I'm saying? There is a certain, and if you chose class war ahead, then maybe that means something to you, and that's a whole thing in itself, so.
And I think we should also keep in mind this idea of the preciousness of the art object. So when we think about that beautiful grand painting versus a urinal, to me there's a really nice parallel between like beautifully installed on a wall cardboard signs made with paint, like really mundane materials, like really calling into question, like what do we display, what do we as a society put up on the walls of our institutions. And that's something that maybe we can mention at some point too, is I think you alluded to it, but this idea of working in kind of defiance of the institutional art world, the institutional art market, this idea of this art as being like precious and valuable, and certain
Right.
institutions that display it, give it its cachet. So kind of working in opposition to that.
That's a whole nother lecture for another day. That can go over another
We'll
100
book you
years of
for,
history. But yes, this idea of questioning the white walls and what belongs on the white walls.
there's a lot of like cheekiness and interestingness in reading signs and reading bumper stickers and like what people are choosing to say, and how, that we don't often get to see it put on a gallery wall, but there's a lot of interesting tidbits because we weren't all at Occupy movements. We're studying but that there really is something here that is fleeting, that he's that he's giving us the opportunity to see in more detail and to take in a slower, different way. And that idea of what his, conceptual art, what was his big idea? What is he trying to show us? But the idea that you could take this moment that's super interesting. Reading signs is so much fun. It's fun. I enjoy it. It's something, but have I gotten to like read this many signs from the Occupy movement? I haven't.
Right.
And creating that moment for just everybody is an interesting artist take, kind of similar to what Richer was doing with giving you both sides of the Sunset Strip. It's like you weren't, unless you were driving down there, you might not have had that experience. So I appreciate this.
And it's also about pointing, and I think you kind of skirted around talking about the preciousness of the objects too, and that I think Lazarus is saying that these are now precious objects that we should pay attention to. People decided that they were worth painting and putting their creative twist on, and that, this is actually somebody's work, labor, ideas. Everything that art is maybe goes into this sign making.
It's partly about voyeurism too.
Say more about that.
Well, the fact that and that's, I'm thinking about it from the audience, the viewer's point of view. Sort of looking in on something that we didn't necessarily participate in. Brady alluded to that, but there's a sense of exploiting that experience when it wasn't really ours.
Do you think that that's negative?
No, I think we do that all the time. And sometimes, and in many times, that then influences us to have a new take on something.
Well, I think also, talking about that, it's important to remember that all of these images came from media outlets of some sort, that they weren't actually taken by the artist, that they came from newspapers, they came from internet blogs, they came from people, obviously, who were there to take the photographs, but what was their position within the movement?
There's something there that really is a quandary for me. I have to believe that he selected specific signs, because today, for every single sign to be so handmade, just does not happen. I mean, we have computers, it's a handmade sign, but you can print things so easily, and I've seen nothing there like that. So what's that about?
Well, he selected the images, the original photographs, so,
These were handmade.
right, but she's saying that there weren't
So
any,
many of them
like,
weren't at the.
It's not a true selection
Right.
of the event.
that's a very good point.
But I also wonder, Barbara, we don't see, we saw the couple of examples of reference photos that we got from our curators, but we don't know the specific references for all these signs. Maybe the black one on the white one, I can't believe we still have to protest this crap. Maybe it was printed in black, and
Somebody else just
but he's
handwrote it.
just giving people only things to recreate them by hand. So we don't know what all of these original signs look like. We can guess the ones that have the illustrations on them. So
that's kind of an inconsistency right there.
but I don't know for sure. I'm just surmising that some of these might not have.
But wasn't part of the process that they had to recreate the signs exactly as they were, so if there were nicks and tears, they had to try and nick and tear them, or try and be as authentic as possible.
So then if they were computer printed, they should have had to.
I guess so, but my guess is that he didn't provide those tools in the art studio. I don't know. You know what? We're going to see him tomorrow. Ask away.
It calls into mind a question that I have. If some of these signs were taken from YouTube videos that were taken on site, does that then become art? Those
The
as
source
they are,
material?
yeah, when somebody does the YouTube and places it for the public to see, they are selecting it. Is that conceptual art?
Well, I think it comes back to the idea of intentionality. I think with all art, there has to be some intention behind it. But maybe, I mean, Jason Lazarus thinks of himself as an archivist, so he collects these things and then displays them. So if he collected a YouTube video collection of protest material and then displayed them, it would become art because the intention is behind that as art.
But Jason Lazarus would be the artist,
Right.
not the YouTube.
And then, but then all those people who send their photographs that are too, that he has in that, too hard to.
It's hard to keep.
Too hard to keep. I mean, some of those may have been, that board that he has wrapped, that is an intentional piece of art that those people put together and put on their, it becomes very,
Murky?
yes.
Yeah. Yes, it's all very murky, and I think everyone will actually come up with their own answers for those questions. I would say that Lazarus is the artist, and the artists were knowingly participating in his work.
Are we all archivists when we put together photographs?
Yes.
Albums? We're all
Yes.
archiving our own history?
Yes.
And every single time, whether on computers or in our photo albums, right? That's the same
Yes.
process, yeah. So that's kind of an interesting thing to think about.
Well, it gets back to the idea of the mundane. Like, snapshot photography is referencing the mundane always, and Lazarus uses a lot of snapshot photography.
She said snapshot photography is referencing the mundane, and that this is the kind of photographic modes that we see some of Lazarus working in, like his dashboard photo that we see. So this idea going back to the mundane, just to reiterate Julia's.
And I think we all are acting as archivists, maybe, but back to intentionality, are you thinking, okay, now I'm sitting down to archive this material as an archivist? Are you doing it as intentional work?
There are a lot of photographers who take portraits of families that are not put on museum walls, they're put on people's walls. But who is to say that those are not as valuable as portraits to be hung on a wall?
Right.
There was a documentary of a woman's portraits that she did of a number of women that were killed by a serial killer. And they were huge, they were 6 by 10 thick. And she was given a show, and then they took the show away from her. Are these portraits still art?
Why? Because it wasn't actually a show?
It wasn't a show. They said the pieces were too inflammatory to the families of the women that were killed. So she can't show her art, her portraits.
Well, did she make them intentionally as artwork? I think.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then-
she did.
yeah.
I mean, I think that goes back to what Lily was saying about sometimes conceptual art is hard to look. Like there's a challenge to the viewer, whether it's the subject matter or the lack of beauty or.
Yeah, but I think just because the institution decides to take it down, it doesn't discredit it as artwork.
And if the institution decides to put something up, does that give it credit?
That's a tricky question. I think an institution, a responsible institution, I think, would not put something up without consideration of the artist and the artist's intention or the maker's intention. And we're actually starting to see this is completely different topic as well, but exhibitions in which an artist or curator is including more ephemera than just artwork, where I don't know if anyone saw the Rosemary Trockle show in New York or read about it, but she's very well known as a German conceptual artist, a female, known for her knit paintings. But in this exhibition, she decided that she wanted to include things that were reference material for her work or just things that she was interested in. So she borrowed like the world's largest lobster exoskeleton and put it in her exhibition, and some blown glass botanical specimens, and these things that were kind of oddities that she wasn't claiming was artwork, even though they were being presented alongside her artwork in an art museum. But they were presented very differently, as this is just material to me. So it's getting blurrier and blurrier, I'm sorry to say.
But I think that this exhibit gives us the opportunity to ask a lot of questions and
Yes.
to generate discussions.
I think that's right, and I think it should.
And I also would think it would bring up the topics that people say, well, I could do that, and my intention is that, and there lots of, but I don't think it's very good art. I mean, there's a judgment quality in conceptual art, a lot that comes to mind.
Sure.
And I think that, can anyone label themselves as an artist, present it, and say that this is art? I mean, if we're talking about that bigger definition of art, I mean,
That's it.
I mean,
Very
it's
hard
really, I mean, this
question.
is all in question in this whole conceptual aspect,
Sure.
as far as I'm concerned.
Anybody can self-publish a book now and call themselves an author, you know, so, you know, and some are good authors who are, you know, it's all in the eyes of the beholder, you know, or the reader in a way.
Right.
Well, we've moved away also from the traditional publishing houses to being allowed to self-publish, which is maybe part of that whole movement of, you can be an artist without being an artist. You can be a writer without being the writer, you know.
You don't need approval from a higher authority.
You don't need approval, and it's, again, your intention that makes you the artist, and the desire to be out there in the world. But
And it's also kind of this moving away from the idea of the specialist, which we're getting everywhere. And right, and you know, even the internet, everyone's a reporter, everyone is, so,
That's true.
and that
Social
started,
media.
yeah. So, I think there are still artists who consider themselves specialists, and maybe they're just specialists in thinking or specialists in organizing other people to make their work. And my answer, by the way, to my kid could do that is always, well, they didn't. So,
Well, I know that's the answer,
Yeah.
So-
Barnett Newman, et cetera.
I know Lily only has like
Oh,
a
yes.
few more minutes
Right.
left, so I want to make sure that if there are either specific things that you really wanted to share with us that you didn't have a chance to, because we're a chatty bunch, we might have taken you a different direction,
Yes.
or if there are questions that you all want to ask specific to our upcoming exhibitions or about contemporary art, that we have a chance to do so. So,
And I also brought a pile of cards, so please feel free to be in touch otherwise as well.
I would be interested if you were prepared to talk about another piece in the show.
Well, I did put in a slide of this piano player because I think this is going to be a really challenging work as well. And again, I would be curious after listening to our conversation this past hour, maybe what you all think about how we can talk about this artwork. Okay.
Yeah, exactly, you got it right there.
Okay. Well, I think.
okay, you all are selling yourselves short because we talked about this in our training and you all had good things to say, so don't feel so intimidated. But
Yes.
go ahead.
It's about learning.
Good. Yes. And part of learning is practicing and repetition.
Instructions.
instructions. Very literally, we've been talking about the composer and the score, reading the music, making the artwork. I have some more kind of visual art examples. This is, I think, a very poignant artwork that's a really hard conceptual artwork. Anquara, still ongoing, is working on this series of paintings called the Today series. And every day he chooses to make one of these paintings. He takes the entire day, and I should have brought in a detail, but it's just a painting with a monochrome background and white text that gives the date. And it takes him an entire day to make this one painting, the day that is represented on the painting. And he does it all over the world when he's traveling. He will wake up and represent the date in the same style that it's represented in that country. So, you know, if he's working in the United States, it's month, day, year. If he's working in Europe, it's day, month, year. So it's very site-specific in a way. And then when he packages the painting at the end of the day, it's in a cardboard box with the painting and a news clipping from the local newspaper. So why am I talking about this in relationship to the piano piece of Jason Lazarus's? Well, repetition, practice,
Mundane,
time, yeah. And I think when these paintings are displayed, I should say the newspaper clipping is not displayed with them. That just goes into an archive. And I think, I can't even recall what piece is getting played on the piano. Does anyone?
Chopin's.
And is there a reason why that work was selected?
I think Chopin used it for teaching, or there was.
Oh, right.
I thought I read something.
That
For
sh-
the students' health.
and yeah, Chopin was really interested in education and teaching. That piece in particular, I think there was an intentionality around Chopin, but I don't think around that piece in particular. Unless anyone else.
Dedicated to a student.
That's it.
Right.
Thank you. You know, that piece also, the Today piece is also kind of reminiscent of Lazarus's piece, which I think for this show is November 11th, 2003, where he's put the day's newspaper articles into the hole in the wall and sealed it up. So we know there's a very specific reference to the date. The date is in the title, but all of those, like the details of what happened in that date, are sealed up and kind of hidden from our view. So we have to bring to like our own associations, our own memories with that date in order to kind of guess what might be in that archive of newspaper articles.
Right, that reminds me also why I brought up the Enquire as the familiarity, because I think I had at some point read that it was a nocturne, and that is a piece that many people will recognize and bring their own memories and their own associations to that. And that is part of Kawara's project, is to present these dates and maybe let the viewer remember back to that time in their own lives, a point of reference, something that one can grab onto even amongst and amid this seemingly cold, straightforward presentation of just numbers and letters.
So he has dates with each one of them?
They are dates. It's just a painting of a date.
Oh, it's the
That
painting.
is.
The painting is the.
I thought it was some other association.
And just the piano practicing again, similar to Occupy, you know, what do we have access to in terms of seeing something? And rarely do we have the access to watching somebody practice. We have the access to watching them perform. So the fact that the artist being Lazarus has to give us access to a practicing moment is again, like, what is he pointing at and what is he choosing to explore in this case is something we don't traditionally have access to. So just, you know, that there is something, you know, we've done that in the museum in different ways, but not quite on the practice level. We've given access to individuals visiting to see someone write a Torah, which is something you don't traditionally have access to. So that is something like on a professional level, it's not the practice point. So this is a different point of something that visitors don't traditionally have access to.
And a lot of them might not though, because a lot of them might not see the practice, which brings it, I mean, because majority of the time, there will not be someone practicing, which will be something that you're also going to have to, yeah.
Well, and I
Or if
think,
it's in a discussion,
Yeah, but it implies memories, thoughts
It's the
about
detail
issue.
of the date piece, the detail.
Repetition.
So you can
when
see
it calls into question what is art what you're hearing when he's practicing, or the installation
It's
itself,
my
the
work in a way,
concept, and, like,
conceptual art,
it requires
because
you
she
to think
showed
and talk
those
about it.
objects from her house and collections and then give
I would say that piece, yes, but she's an illustrator.
Yeah.
I'm just passing around detail of the date, the today piece, so everyone can see what those paintings would look
And
up.
when he's not practicing,
close.
what is it? Because many of us will be giving tours when he's not there.
Lazarus very deliberately said it is a sculpture when it's not in use. But again, interesting, a sculpture that he didn't make. We rented it here in San Francisco, from what I understand. So a sculpture that is a sculpture that has his name on it because he said, I want a baby grand piano in this gallery. And yeah.
I
What?
think you're all ready to talk about this artwork.
Anything else before Lily goes?
You've been a great group. Please be in touch.
Thank you for your help.
Thank you.
And really, I am happy to answer questions that might come up. If someone asks you something in the gallery and you're stumped, you can email me, you can call me. Did my cards make it around the
No,
table?
they got stuck at that one end.
Where did they go?
I took one, they must be somewhere.
You can also get to her through me if you need.
But, yeah, thank you all.
Thank you.
This has been a very good conversation.